Greetings. Today we're going to be talking about mods, or rather the potential of mods, and how they might be implemented in the game upon full release. Now, I'll say at the outset that modding in Baldur's Gate 3 is already a thing. If you played early access, there are a lot of cool mods, and the modding community is, all things considered, fairly big, considering it was early access. And in addition to that, we know that Larian has gone on record that they will be supporting modding, which basically means we can assume that they will be releasing a tool set that will allow modders to do the best work they possibly can. We don't have an ETA on that. However, the fact remains that many mods were produced without a proper modding toolkit, specially tailored to Baldur's Gate 3, and nonetheless some very cool mods were made. Some of these are mods related to class, ability stats, equipment, and many cosmetic mods. Cosmetic mods I have found very helpful because, frankly speaking, I am not always satisfied with the faces/heads available for certain races. Now, I truly believe that the modding scene for Baldur's Gate 3 could be one of the biggest among games. Probably not quite as big as Skyrim or Fallout, or as big as Bethesda games, but I think pretty big in general, because we already know that Divinity Original Sin 2 was a game with lots of mods, lots of modders, lots of cool additions, and Baldur's Gate 3 eclipses that game in terms of sheer size and scale, as well as in other respects, and that implies to me that the modding scene will be very big. So we should talk about what type of mods we could expect reasonably. Now, I'm not a modder myself, although I'm very fortunate to have a modder on my Discord server. Shout out to Lost Soul, who, as far as I'm aware, has sworn a vow to the gods that he will begin modding the game as soon as possible. But I do have a sense of what's plausible and what's less plausible when it comes to mods. So, some of the mods that will be released very quickly for this game, independent of any toolkit, will be cosmetic mods. And I think many people appreciate that. Many people want additional hairstyles. In my own case, I'm very dissatisfied with a lot of the faces, particularly the female faces, and cosmetic mods solve that issue rather readily. I suspect they're going to be released fairly soon. Other mods that will be released fairly soon, I suspect, would be mods that change proficiencies, stat distribution, and things of that nature. For example, the almighty, very popular variant human that gains a free proficiency as well as a feat upon first level, which is very potent, in addition to +1 and +2 to whichever ability score you want to give them to. Things of that nature, I think, are going to be delivered rather quickly. Once a proper modding tool set arrives, I think we're going to see even more of what I've already mentioned, but in addition to that, other things. Items, new archetypes, classes, etc., probably even sub-races and races. One thing I think that probably won't happen, at least within the context of the main story as told by Larian, are mods that directly affect the story, and or mods that add new stories. It's very difficult given the intricacies of the game, and this touches upon a point that I think we should all reflect upon when it comes to modding, and that is, one could say, the double-edged sword of reactivity. If you take a game such as Skyrim, or even Starfield, although it's not out yet, we know what Bethesda games are like. There's generally not a lot of reactivity, which in some ways sucks, but on the other hand, it gives the opportunity to implement story mods, as well as modify perk systems, classes, and things of this nature rather seamlessly because it's not going to interfere with the story. What happens, though, when you have a game like Baldur's Gate 3 with a lot of reactivity? Reactivity not just in terms of the choices you make within the story, but racial reactivity. When you're half-orc, people will almost certainly notice that. If you're a gnome, people will notice that. Dwergar, we are told, have 200 lines of reactivity in the game, and these are the obscure Grey Dwarves. Classes, I've mentioned this before, have reactivity. Barbarians have special lines. Druids do, especially in the context of the Druid growth, and the list goes on and on and on. So if you're a modder and you want to mod in a new class, or archetype, or race, for example, what do you do? Because it's unlikely that you'll be able to include that degree of reactivity in the game as a modder, through no fault of the modders, of course. Let's say, for example, that Larian never releases the Artificer class officially. Modders want to mod that in. I have no doubt that modders could do that, but it would be very difficult to mod in the reactivity from my understanding. I'm not a modder, but this is what I've been told, and I think it's also logical if you think about it. So I fully suspect the modding scene to be very vibrant and very big, especially after an official modding kit is released. But there are some unique challenges to this game that in part stem from the fact that the game is just really good and really reactive. And it would almost certainly feel like missing out were you to have a certain class, a new one, or archetype, or a homebrew without that level of reactivity. And one of my subs mentioned the potential idea of AI, as in AI voices, but that's very tricky to implement because whose voice you're going to use, would it make sense? So the biggest challenge to modding would be reactivity. But in many cases, cosmetic mods don't need reactivity, item mods don't need reactivity, and even some archetypes potentially. Although, I would not be surprised if you are a druid of the spores, traveling about the Underdark, say talking to the Myconids or somebody else, that they might comment on the fact that you are a druid of the spores and have something in common with them. So I'm pretty sure that even archetypes will have reactivity. Imagine if you're a necromancer. I'm pretty sure someone's going to comment on that, especially if you're running around with a bunch of zombies. So this is a challenge. Nonetheless, whatever happens, I do think the modding scene is going to be tremendous in Baldur's Gate 3. I think it's going to bring a lot of innovation and longevity to the game, and this is a game that, on its own, is going to have tons of replay value. If you just go by the origins, we're talking about at least 7 playthroughs, setting aside all the decisions you might make within those playthroughs, and that's a big deal. And then add mods on top of that, and you have a potentially very, very long-lived game indeed. As for myself, the top priorities for me will be downloading cosmetic mods to fix various faces, as well as getting access to variant humans. And I think, to be perfectly honest, that's on the top of the list of many people. And beyond that, we'll see. Apart from cosmetic mods, my first run will probably be largely unmodded, but after the very first playthrough, it could very well be modded up the wazoo. And to piggyback somewhat on my previous video, this is why I think it's so important, ideally, that Larian consider releasing DLC for new archetypes, new races, new everything, because if they do it themselves, say for example they introduce Aasimar, then we know that there's going to be Aasimar reactivity. After all, they wouldn't release a new race with no reactivity. That would make no sense. And some, of course, would be easier to make than others. Aasimar are humanoids, therefore would be fairly easy to make. And that's the critical difference between Aasimar, say, made by modders and Aasimar made by Larian. I'm 100% confident that modders could very easily create Aasimar. It could look pretty good. They would have all the stats, all the proficiencies, etc., but they wouldn't have the same degree of reactivity. Which is why, again, I really hope that Larian decides to add multiple new races, archetypes, and the whole lot, because it would bring that reactivity with it, whereas modders are unlikely to succeed at that. I could be wrong, and if I am, let me know in the comment section, but that's what I believe at least. I certainly be very willing to pay money for this, as has been indicated by many people in the comment section of the previous video. So Larian, if you are listening, we would be very eager to pay for more classes, more archetypes, more races, provided they have the same degree of reactivity that currently exists for the ones that are available at launch. On top of that, I am intensely curious as to what you guys think. Are you really into modding? Are you not? Do you plan on modding the game from the get-go? Are you going to wait for a second or third or fourth playthrough? Let me know in the comment section. I'd love to see it. Now, before I go, I'd like to invite you to my Discord, where you can discuss Baldur's Gate 3 with like-minded people, as well as other RPGs. And as always, thank you for tuning in. And if you like my content, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel. And hit the bell icon to be informed of my videos, as it helps out with growth. And I'll check you out next time. Take care.